I left the house at 4:11 in the morning on a Tuesday in mid-autumn in Albany, New York. It was still dark, the pavement damp with dew, and the chill crept through the thin wool sweater on my shoulders. I carried only an old canvas bag, a few sets of clothes, my laptop, and 25 years of holding back. In the house where I had lived nearly my whole life, the kitchen light was still on. I knew for sure my mother would see the letter I left as soon as she came down to brew her coffee, just as I knew she wouldn't call me back. Rowan got a new car when he graduated college. I got a bill charging me $800 a month to rent my own bedroom. At his graduation party, between clinking glasses and a chorus of "Congratulations, son," my dad turned to me and said, face blank, as if he were announcing a change in gas prices. My mother didn't object. Rowan looked down, didn't say a word, but I caught the flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. If you've ever had to choose between your dignity and your family, leave a comment, hit like, share this story, and follow the channel so you don't miss what comes next. My name is Sophia. I'm 25, an accountant at a small insurance firm in the city. I'm the eldest in the Anderson family, where all the praise went to my younger brother, and all the responsibility fell on me. I didn't respond to my dad. I just sat still, picked up a piece of ham, chewed slowly, then set my fork down. The meal went on as if I weren't there. As always. My mom asked Rowan about his graduation speech, my dad talked about the new car, and I kept slicing my bread into tiny pieces, like dissecting a decision I should have made years ago. I used to think that if I worked harder, waited longer, things would change. But that night, holding a bill signed by my own father, I understood. The only thing I ever lacked was just enough silence for them to forget I existed. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't cry. I just got up from the table, cleared the dishes, washed them in cold water, and went to my room. In my mind, something began to shift. No drama, no rebellion. Just something inside me stopped enduring. My footsteps were light down the wooden hallway, skipping the third step that always creaked. I didn't want to wake my mother. Not because she needed rest, but because I didn't want to be stopped. I wanted to leave while they were still asleep, while the house still smelled of last night and the wall clock my grandmother once loved kept ticking. I left the letter on the kitchen table. A brief list, no accusations, no pleading. I wrote down every payment I made, every chore I handled, every meal I bought myself when the family held separate dinners for Rowan. I wrote, "This isn't a goodbye, it's a receipt," then set it next to the sugar jar, where my mother was sure to see it. Outside, the air was biting. The streetlights still glowed soft yellow along the curb. I pulled my collar up, gripped the bag tighter, and walked briskly to the bus stop. With each step, I left behind an old piece. My father's stare, my mother's silence, Rowan's smirk when I was ignored. The station had only one sleepy guard and a young woman holding two small children. I sat a few seats away, waiting for the bus that would take me out of Albany, a place that had meant everything but never truly felt like home. I paid for my ticket in cash, heading to a small town in Vermont where my godmother Helen lived. I hadn't seen her since I was 11, but I remembered she was the only one who ever said to me, "Sophia, you don't have to be like anyone else to be loved." That sentence, for years, was the only thing that kept me from giving up completely. As the bus pulled away, I looked out the window. Familiar buildings faded, grew smaller, then disappeared. I didn't know exactly where I was headed or what I'd do, but one thing was certain: I wouldn't return unless I chose to. It took nearly 12 hours to reach Rutland, Vermont, a town I'd only heard about through Christmas cards from Helen, the woman listed on my baptism certificate, who'd vanished from our family after an argument my mother refused to explain. She picked me up at the station, just as I remembered her. Silver hair tied back, petite frame, eyes that missed nothing. Before I could apologize for showing up unannounced, she said, "You look more like Evelyn than I expected." Evelyn, my grandmother. The only woman who ever looked me in the eye and asked, "Are you okay?" with no hidden agenda. "I don't know where to begin," I said as we turned onto a maple-lined road. "Then start in the middle," she replied. where you got tired of pretending. Her home wasn't big, but everything seemed placed with intention. Faded still life paintings, potted flowers by the kitchen window, and on the dining table, a pot of hot tea, unsweetened. I sat down, my hands still cold from the trip, while she poured tea like I'd always lived there. I wrote a letter, I said quietly. Not a goodbye, more like an itemized list. Helen looked up. Did you list everything? Every dollar, every gift, every forgotten holiday. She nodded. Good. Clarity is the first step to reclaiming self-respect. My mind wandered back to evenings in that Albany kitchen. My dad reading the paper, my mom chopping vegetables, me washing dishes. It looked peaceful until I realized I was never really there. Not invisible, just background, like a living room wall. Present, but unseen. I remembered when Rowan broke Mom's favorite vase. I was 7, coloring near the table. When glass shattered, Dad came in, looked around, and said to me, "You need to be more careful." I hadn't touched it, but I nodded. Because if I didn't, dinner would be cold and silent. At 16, Rowan had his birthday party at an Italian restaurant. I was assigned to collect coats and take dinner orders. Mom said, "Sophia's great at organizing." Dad added, "She's perfect for logistics." I smiled. No one asked if I wanted cake. These little things added up, year by year, until they became a role. When I got my first job at a small accounting firm in Schenectady, I invited the whole family to dinner. Dad asked, "Do you have health insurance yet?" Mom asked, "Still doing online classes?" Rowan showed up late, but was still praised for making the effort. I couldn't recall when I started shrinking myself. Maybe the year I stopped decorating my room, or when I switched all my clothes to neutral colors so laundry could be shared. Living in a house where you feel like a guest, you start trying not to be a burden. I used to think keeping the peace was enough, I said as Helen placed a slice of apple pie in front of me. And others used that kindness to forget you were human, she replied. I didn't answer. I just picked up my fork, took a bite, and realized I hadn't had dessert in months. That night, I slept in a room with a window facing the garden. The pillow smelled of dried lavender. The blanket was thick and warm. In the dark, I reached into my suitcase for the small wooden box, my last memento from Grandma Evelyn. Inside were 3 leather journals and a sticky note. Don't let them take what should be yours. At the time, I didn't fully understand those words, but I had a feeling Helen would. The next morning, when I neatly folded the blanket and came downstairs, she was already seated with a cup of black coffee and a stack of papers. "Tomorrow," she said, "we're visiting the attorney's office. There are some things about Evelyn you should know." I didn't know what was waiting behind that folder, but I felt it clearly. This wasn't about resentment or hurt anymore. This was about truth and what it costs to face it. I sat in the passenger seat as Helen drove us down a narrow road toward the law office in southern Rutland. The sky was overcast, and the air smelled of damp pine and old wood. Helen stayed quiet, her hand steady on the wheel, like she was holding back a storm made of too many unsaid things. "His name's Archer Delaney," she said, parking in front of a small building with a dark green roof. "Old school, but solid." I nodded. My hands were ice, though the car wasn't cold. The office smelled of paper and stale coffee. A man around 40, gray at the temples, shook my hand and gestured for me to sit across from a wooden desk. "Miss Sophia, I've looked through some of the documents Helen brought. I think we should begin here." He slid a tan folder toward me. "Are you aware there's a trust account in your name?" I shook my head. No one ever mentioned it. "Miss Evelyn, your grandmother set up this account when you were 16. It was designed to activate when you turned 21. I looked at her signature on the documents. Firm, precise strokes, and beneath it my name in bold print, Sophia Grace Anderson. "This account has never been dispersed," he continued. "Technically speaking, you've been of age for 4 years now." I opened my mouth to say something, but my throat caught. Helen placed her hand over mine and gave a gentle squeeze. "Was there a reason it was withheld?" I asked. "Yes," he replied. There are signs the authority was altered, and I suspect that's when your father, Mr. Daniel Anderson, obtained temporary control while you were hospitalized during your senior year of high school. I remembered that time. 2 weeks in a treatment center after nearly collapsing from exhaustion and lack of sleep. I never told anyone how overwhelmed I felt managing school, work, and the household while Mom was sick. I just stayed quiet, like always. Hillary used his proxy rights to change the beneficiary, Archer said slowly, or at least temporarily reroute the asset control to himself. It's technically legal, but completely contradicts the original intent. I didn't react. I just stared at the print on the page, trying to anchor myself amid the whirlwind forming in my head. Helen poured water from the glass pitcher on the table. "And this," she said, sliding out a small envelope, "I found in one of Evelyn's notebooks." Inside was a copy of a document with both my name and Rowan's. I read it line by line, my heart beat steady but deep. It was a form transferring tuition from Evelyn's scholarship fund, originally for me, into the name of Rowan Anderson. The signature was mine, but the handwriting wasn't. I tilted my head, the way the letters curved at the ends. That used to be Rowan's childhood habit when he mimicked my writing just to tease me. He used to practice forging my signature, I said softly. Archer nodded. Fortunately, Miss Evelyn kept the original records. If this is forged, we've got legal grounds to pursue. I leaned back in the chair. It felt like I was watching my life from a new angle, a life I thought had gone wrong because I wasn't good enough, when in fact, it may have been rigged from the start. Is there a way to reclaim what's mine? Here is, Archer answered, but it'll take time, and your family will not react well. I thought of Dad, his cold stare, his voice that always came out as commands. I thought of Mom, her gaze sliding away whenever I needed her to speak up. I thought of Rowan, the half-smile he wore when I was ignored at dinner, his hand gripping the steering wheel of the new car I helped fund by skipping meals and wearing old clothes. I looked Archer straight in the eye. They don't have to like it, they just have to understand. I won't be silent anymore. Helen smiled softly. Archer nodded and slid a fresh stack of papers toward me. Then we start here. I signed each page with a steady hand, like I'd been waiting for this moment all along. That evening, I sat on Helen's porch with Evelyn's notebook on my lap and a warm mug of cocoa in my hands. The moon had risen above the tree line, light reflecting on the window glass. I reread the last line in her journal. If you're reading this, hold your ground, because justice never finds you on its own. I stepped out of Archer's office that afternoon into a light drizzle, my coat damp at the shoulders and my hands still trembling from the documents I had just signed. It wasn't fear. It felt like something inside me was shifting, like a piece of wood held too long over fire, finally beginning to crack. Helen didn't say anything on the drive back. She turned on the radio. An old jazz track filled the quiet. I stared out the window as Rutland passed in slow motion through the rain. Yellowed leaves, damp porch steps, fading moms on stoops. When we got home, I brewed tea myself and poured 2 cups. It was the first time I took the lead since arriving, and she accepted the cup without comment, raising an eyebrow as quiet acknowledgement. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the hardwood floor, my back against the bed frame, a soft light glowing. In front of me, the photocopy of the forged tuition document. The handwriting nearly fooled me. My memories looped like flickering home videos. Dinner at 20, when Mom said Rowan deserved. The scholarship because he was pursuing something serious. The day I asked Dad if I could borrow the car for an interview, and he said, "Why don't you ask your boyfriend to drive you, like a normal person?" I didn't have a boyfriend. I had a bike with a faulty rear brake and a resume held together with Scotch tape. I smiled, said nothing, and walked almost 2 hours to that interview. They didn't hire me. The next morning, I got up early and wandered downtown Rutland. No agenda, just the need to breathe somewhere memory didn't follow. A cafe near the corner opened by 6:30. I sat alone by the window, ordered an espresso, and pulled out my notebook. Not for anything profound, just a list. I wrote down what I had sacrificed, not out of obligation, but because I used to think I was supposed to. Canceled holidays to pick up Rowan. Birthday gifts I never received because money was tight this year. Praise that only came if it followed his name. Halfway through the page, I stopped writing. My hand was numb and my chest felt tired. Laying all this out like a museum of hurt no longer served me. I tore out the page, folded it in thirds, and slipped it into my coat pocket. Then I left the cafe. That afternoon, Helen found me trimming wilted roses in the backyard, collecting fallen leaves. She didn't ask why I'd been out early, didn't mention the list. She simply handed me an envelope. Your mother called. I took it, but didn't open it. The handwriting was familiar, round, careful, each letter measured like it had been traced with a ruler. The postmark said Albany. The return name, in blue ink, Margaret Anderson. I placed the letter on the kitchen counter, washed my hands, and stared at it. I'm not sure what I want to hear from her anymore, I said. Maybe to Helen, maybe to myself. Helen hung up the pruning shears, wiped her hands on a towel. Then don't read it hoping. Read it like you're verifying facts. No expectations, no collapse. I nodded and opened the letter. Just one page. She wrote that she'd heard I left home, that she was worried, that Dad was furious and Rowan had gone silent. At the end, she wrote, if you feel like you no longer have a place in this house, I want you to know, to me, you're still a part of it. I folded the letter and slipped it into a kitchen drawer. Didn't tear it up, didn't keep it close, just placed it far enough not to rattle me. Close enough to remind me. They still think I'm the one who's supposed to return. That evening, as the air turned cold, I sat with Helen on the porch, hands wrapped around a mug of cocoa, watching the maple leaves spin in the wind. I thought about how easily people become complicit in injustice, not by what they do, but by what they refuse to say. 1 week after the letter arrived, the phone rang at 6 a.m., a deliberate hour. Not a mistake, but a call meant to wake someone. I didn't answer. The screen lit up with an Albany number, then went to voicemail. Minutes later, a message. Sophia, it's your father, come home. Your mother's been crying all week. Don't make this worse. I read it, didn't respond. Then Rowan's message came. If there's something you need to say, at least call me. Everyone's losing it over you. I placed my phone face down on the table and went back to rinse out the half-finished coffee mug. The smell of watered-down brew mixed with the damp morning air made my stomach turn, not because of the message, but because of how familiar it all was. How they took turns trying to pull me back, like I was the final bolt keeping a collapsing system in place. I returned to my room and pulled out the file Archer had given me last week. Over 30 pages of legal documents, bank statements, and signature analysis reports. Each page sliced clean through the fog. Who signed what, transferred what, and when. No more I think, or maybe they did. Only facts, stamped and dated. That afternoon, I walked to the little bookstore on the corner of Elm Street, where Helen usually took me when she needed cards or magazines. I asked the owner, a woman with curly hair named Margaret, if they were hiring part-time help. Have you worked retail before? She asked. No, I said, but I'm good at ringing up purchases, and I know how to ask customers what they need without making them feel watched. She smiled and told me to come in Monday morning for a trial shift. I nodded, thanked her, and walked home, feeling a little lighter. It wasn't exactly starting over, but at least I was in motion. That night, while Helen peeled apples in the kitchen, I leaned against the doorway, watching her. I think it's time to confront them, I said. She didn't look up. Are you ready? Probably not, but waiting won't change anything. Helen dried her hands and pulled a wrapped bundle from the drawer. Evelyn left this. She said if the day came when you had to stand alone, you should know exactly what you're standing on. Inside were handwritten notes. Times my grandmother had been pushed out of family financial decisions. Gatherings where Daniel, my father, spoke over my mother, signed documents on her behalf without objection from anyone. One line made me stop. Margaret hasn't had a voice in this house since 1998. She doesn't protest, but I see it in her eyes when she looks at Sophia, like someone on a tightrope, trying to balance without ever daring to jump. I folded the page carefully, not because I was sentimental, but because it was suddenly clear. This was bigger than just me. On Monday morning, I arrived at the bookstore half an hour early. The glass doors were still fogged from the cold. Margaret arrived just after me, unlocked the door, and flipped the lights on. I helped her roll out the display carts, dust the new arrivals, and learned how to shelve books by barcode. My hands worked while my ears picked up bits of customer chatter. An older woman buying comics for her grandson, a teenager asking for historical fiction. I didn't feel invisible here. I was a real person, doing work, getting responses, being seen. During our break, Margaret made us both tea. She said, "You're calm, pleasant, but your eyes, it's like you're holding back a storm." I smiled. Maybe because I'm waiting. For something big? Yeah, let's call it a conversation that no one else wants to start. That evening, when I got home, Helen had the local news playing on the radio. I dropped my bag, hung up my coat, and paused when I heard the anchor say, "A financial investigation involving the Anderson family of Albany is now under formal review by the Inheritance Oversight Bureau." I looked over. Helen turned off the radio. Archers started. I nodded. They know by now. Oh, they're not going to stay quiet. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a video call from Rowan. I didn't answer. I stepped outside, took a deep breath, and texted back 3 words, "We'll talk soon." I didn't expect the first person to show up would be him. Rowan came to Rutland on a Saturday morning, 3 days after the investigation made headlines. I had no idea until Helen glanced out the window and said, "There's a strange car parked out front." I stepped onto the porch. Rowan stood beside a silver sedan, hands in his coat pockets, eyes down on the gravel path. When he looked up, he seemed more worn than I'd ever seen. Dark circles, hair unkempt. No shiny car, no smug smile. "Can I have a few minutes?" he asked softly, not embarrassed, but like he was trying not to fall apart. I nodded and pointed to the porch bench. He sat on the edge, not leaning back, fists clenched. I sat opposite him, keeping a solid gap between us, an invisible shield. "I'm not here for Dad," Rowan said. "Not for Mom either. I'm here because I realized I can't avoid this anymore." I said nothing. I waited. Back in senior year, Dad handed me some papers. Said they were scholarship forms. I signed them. Didn't ask. "You signed the transfer of my tuition fund." Rowan nodded. At the time, I thought, if I said no, he'd call me ungrateful. If I said yes, maybe I'd study hard and pay it back. "And you stayed silent." I was scared. The longer it went, the harder it got. The clearer it became, the more ashamed I felt. I stayed quiet, eyes following a dried leaf as it dropped to the steps. "I'm not here to defend it," Rowan said. "I just want you to know, I never believed I deserved what I got. But you still took it." He paused, nodding, his shoulders sinking. "I did. And I was wrong." In that moment, I saw flashes of our childhood, sitting in the basement with Lego bricks. I built, he destroyed. I taught him multiplication tables, while Mom brought cookies for just one of us. I used to think I was a side character in my own family. But now, I saw Rowan too had been forced into a script he never chose. He pulled a bundle from his coat. "These are my bank statements. I've been working at a lumber mill near Aunt Rachel's for 3 weeks. If nothing else, I'll repay every cent." I didn't take it. I don't want your money. I want the truth to be acknowledged. "You'll have it," Rowan said, swallowing hard. "And if it comes to it, I'll testify. Sign anything, whatever it takes." We sat in silence. A delivery truck rumbled past in the distance. My throat tightened, not out of anger anymore, but sheer exhaustion. If you've ever been silenced because no one believed you, or blamed for speaking up? Leave a comment. Share this story if you know someone who needs to hear it. That afternoon, my mother called. I picked up. Her voice was faint, not quite crying, but like someone who'd had their voice taken away. Sophia, are you okay? I'm still breathing, Mom. I want to see you. Not to explain, just there are some things I need to say to your face. I paused a few seconds, then agreed. We arranged to meet at a small diner outside Burlington, far from our old house, far from ears that might listen in. That night, I sat with Archer, going over the next steps. Every legal option if Dad decided to retaliate. Outside, the wind picked up. Helen came in carrying a basket of apples, set it on the table, and said, "The first time Evelyn ever spoke to me about Daniel, she only said this: 'He doesn't know how to love anyone without calculating the profit margin.'" I laughed under my breath, not because it was funny, but because I felt a little lighter. The cold air didn't reach so deep anymore. The next day, I took the bus to Burlington. While sitting at the station, I noticed a mother and child playing a Spot the Difference game in a magazine. The child laughed out loud every time he got one right. The mother laughed too. Naturally. Without trying, without forcing. I looked at them. Not envious, not sad. Just aware. I had once longed for that, but I didn't need it anymore. The bus arrived right on time. I got on and pulled my scarf snug around my neck. The wind was stronger than forecasted, I thought. Even if it rained today, I wouldn't bother with an umbrella. I wasn't expecting an apology from my mother, but I did want to know, after all those years, had she ever even noticed she was looking the other way? She was already waiting for me at a quiet cafe tucked behind an old bookstore on College Street, a place quiet enough that honest words wouldn't get drowned in noise. She wore a gray wool coat I recognized from old Thanksgiving photos. Her eyes were a little puffy, her hands wrapped around a half-empty mug of herbal tea. I walked to the table and sat down without ordering anything. She looked up, and her gaze didn't carry that usual warmth she reserved for Rowan. This time it was direct, not evasive, but not entirely steady either. "I don't know where to start," she said. Her voice was hoarse, like someone who had cried too long without wiping her face. "Wherever you want. I'm here to listen." She sighed and turned the cup slowly in her hands. "The day you left, I wasn't surprised. I wasn't even angry. I was just scared." "Scared of what?" I asked, my voice even, not soft but not sharp. "Scared that I wouldn't know how to call you my daughter without feeling like a stranger." I stayed silent, hands resting on my lap. The chill from outside crept in through the fogged-up window pane. "I knew Daniel wasn't fair to you," she continued. "I knew he controlled everything. The accounts, the property, even what I was allowed to buy." She paused as if waiting for me to flinch. I didn't. "Dion, when Evelyn passed," she said softly, "I had one last conversation with her. She told me, 'Margaret, if you don't stand up for Sophia, one day you'll have to watch her stand up without needing anyone.' I didn't understand then. I do now. I looked at her, but I didn't see a weak woman. I saw someone who had chosen to stay still just to avoid being swept away and had ended up suffocated by her own silence. "Why didn't you say something earlier?" I asked. "One word from you and you could have—" "Done what? Been pushed out like Helen, branded the traitor in the family? And I was supposed to be okay with that?" She lowered her head. I was wrong to think silence could protect anyone. I didn't respond. She wasn't looking for forgiveness, and I hadn't brought any with me. "I've started working with a lawyer," she said, shifting gears without really changing the topic. "To separate assets, close joint accounts, revoke the power of attorney. I want to put everything back in my own name." I nodded. "That's the right move." "And with you." She looked up. "I'm not asking you to come back. I just want you to know. I've rented a small apartment near Aunt Lisa's. If you ever need anything, or just want some tea, I'll be there." I stayed a few more minutes, no questions, no promises. When I stood up, she didn't hug me. She just said, "Thank you for coming." I nodded. I came because I needed clarity, not because I softened. Good, she said with a faint smile. You're more like Evelyn than I ever realized. Outside, the rain had stopped. I walked toward the bus stop, not feeling lighter, but more certain, like blurry lines on a map had finally been drawn bold. That night, Helen made sweet potato soup and turned on the fireplace. I sat at the kitchen table, going over Archer's files, marking the sections to cross-revention with the documents Mom had promised to send. When I shared a bit about the meeting, Helen simply asked, "How did it feel?" I think I just met someone who's trying to become herself after being the backdrop for too long. She nodded and said nothing more. The scent of cinnamon and sautéed onions filled the kitchen. The next morning, I got an email from Archer. Subject line, witness confirmation. The body was brief. Rowan agreed to testify. Signature verification documents had been submitted. The hearing was expected in 3 weeks. I sat still, fingers on the keyboard, feeling warmth returning to my palms. 3 weeks. Enough time for someone to prepare. Also enough for others to unravel. I wasn't waiting for them to admit guilt, but I was ready to make it impossible for them to keep denying it. The call came on Thursday afternoon, just after I finished my shift at the bookstore. Archer's voice was steady, but slower than usual. "January responded," he said. He didn't opt for private negotiation like we thought. "What does that mean?" I asked, still holding the strap of my shoulder bag. Pitt hired a private legal team, filed a countersuit, denying all charges, including forged signatures and abuse of power of attorney. I leaned against the brick wall by the counter, watching the main street at rush hour, scattered people, golden light on the car roofs. "What about Rowan?" "We've worked with him. He signed a statement to testify voluntarily. He also confirmed the signature sample was forged." I wasn't surprised by Dad's reaction. If there was one thing he was better at than finance, it was pretending to be so innocent that he almost believed it himself. But what did make me pause was that chill down my spine, realizing he was no longer holding back. He was stepping into the light, wearing that familiar face, proud, cold, and certain no one would dare go too far. That night, Helen and I sat in the living room, warm lamp glow, 2 mugs of tea between us, and a stack of papers Archer had sent over in an email, which I printed out for her. "He's going for a direct strike," I said, laying the counterclaim on the table. "I think he really believes I'll back down." Helen didn't say anything at first. She picked up a page, read it carefully. Her eyes didn't waver. Her hands didn't shake. Then she looked up. "The problem is," she said, "he's gotten so used to you enduring everything, he thinks this is no different." I sat back, fingers laced. What I felt wasn't fear. It was the stillness of knowing you're about to step up to the witness stand, with the whole room waiting to hear. That weekend, Archer arranged a pre-hearing prep session at his Rutland office. I arrived 10 minutes early. Margaret from the bookstore had sent over a small box of pastries and a handwritten note. "Just stand. Don't flinch." The meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. Archer laid out the rebuttal plan, relying on documents Evelyn left behind, the abused power of attorney, and Rowan's testimony. The way he explained things made me feel like I wasn't some rebellious daughter, but someone defending what's right. When the meeting ended, Archer walked me to the door. "Sophia," he said, "there will be a moment when he tries to use emotion to throw you off course. Hold on to why you started." "I'm not here to win," I said. "I'm here to make sure it's all on record, the right way." The next day, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. Subject, "From Naomi. Please read." It took me a few seconds to remember Naomi. Rowan's college ex. She'd met me once at a year-end party. Quiet, observant, and visibly uncomfortable in our house. The email was only 3 short paragraphs. "I know what's happening. I still have a few texts and recordings of times Daniel forced Rowan to do things against his will, including something about the scholarship. If you need them, I'm willing to share." I read it 3 times, not out of doubt, but because it felt like things were finally reconnecting, pieces I thought were long gone, returning just enough to bring the picture into focus. I replied briefly, "Thank you. Meeting in person would be better." On Monday morning, I met Naomi at a bakery near the park. She arrived on time wearing a plum-colored sweater and carrying a canvas bag with her laptop. Her face hadn't changed much, but her eyes were more guarded than before. "Rowan told me bits and pieces," she said after we ordered 2 cups of tea. "But I don't think he knew I was recording. I did it because I felt trapped between someone fragile and a family that felt dangerous." "You weren't wrong," I said. Naomi opened her laptop and handed me the headphones. In the recording, my father's voice came through, clear, steady, and coldly persuasive. "I'll never question it. He's too busy doing dishes and working 2 jobs. Just sign it. If anything happens later, I'll handle it." Naomi looked at me, her hand slightly trembling as she removed the headphones. "I don't want to be involved anymore," she said, "but if you need me to testify, I'll show up." I nodded, wrote everything down in my notebook, and thanked her for her courage. As I left the bakery, the wind began to pick up. I pulled my collar higher and walked slowly through the park. Children were playing on the grass, shouting fearlessly. I paused to watch, then continued on, feeling the ground beneath my feet more clearly than I had in days. The preliminary hearing took place on Wednesday morning in a small courtroom at the Cuyahoga County Courthouse, mid-November. The sky was a damp gray with misty rain falling gently, almost as if Cleveland itself was trying to keep what was about to unfold under wraps. I sat on the plaintiff's bench, Archer beside me, a thick file in hand and a coffee cup placed casually next to his shoe. I didn't touch my own cup. My hands were clasped on my lap, fingers twitching softly against the fabric of my pants, a quiet reflex to keep my mind anchored. Daniel walked in 5 minutes before the hearing, still in his charcoal trench coat, silver gray tie, and with that same measured stride. Next to him was his attorney, a woman in her early 50s with short hair, rimless glasses, and eyes that never lingered on anything longer than 3 seconds. Daniel didn't glance my way, but I looked at him. Not to challenge him, but to see if anything in that face still resembled the father I once wished would understand me. The hearing didn't last more than an hour. Archer presented the basis of our claim, initial proof of the power of attorney abuse, and Naomi's material, filed under seal, with the judge allowed to review it privately at our request. Daniel, through his attorney, denied all allegations, but made no mention of the recorded details. When I stepped out of the courtroom, I didn't feel relief, only clarity. This wasn't ending soon. Archer walked beside me in silence to the parking lot. He opened my door before speaking. "Are you doing okay?" "I don't feel anything," I admitted. "It's like stepping into a sealed room. You know there's no wind, but you still hope the candle stays lit." "Keep that," he said. "That feeling helps people hold on when it counts." The next day, Helen came to my house carrying a large tote bag filled with documents and fresh bread. "Archer called me," she said, setting the bag on the dining table. "He said Rowan's official deposition is next week, and Daniel will be summoned too." I poured some tea, handed her a cup, and sat across from her. "You're going to have to face him. This time, no phone calls, no letters. In person." Helen didn't blink. She nodded, then reached into the bag and pulled out a pale blue folder. "I wasn't planning to give this to you," she said, "but maybe it's time someone read it." Inside was an old journal, my mother's, Evelyn. The ink had faded, the paper had yellowed slightly, but her handwriting remained neat and deliberate. I held it and flipped through a few pages. One passage caught my eye. Daniel never told me he used Sophia's scholarship fund to invest. I only found out when the bank statement arrived. I wanted to confront him, but when I looked into his eyes, I saw something familiar. I had no choice. I closed the notebook, my chest filled with noise that couldn't turn into sound. Helen reached over and gently placed her hand on mine. "She left more than we thought," she said, The question is, are you ready for others to hear it? That afternoon, I went to the bookstore. Margaret stood at the counter, checking inventory and softly whistling along to the background music. When she saw me, she turned the music off. "Looks like you've come through the storm," she said, peering at me over her red glasses. "Ready for the next chapter?" "What chapter?" "The one where you don't have to defend yourself anymore, where you just live, read books, drink tea, and slowly forget about emergency calls." I smiled, not because of her words, but because of the simplicity in the picture she painted. A small future, but peaceful. That night, I sat at my dining table, opened my laptop, and wrote a long message to Rowan. You don't have to pick sides, you just need to say what's true, the kind of truth we've both thought would never be spoken out loud. After hitting send, I shut the laptop, stood up, made a cup of hot lemon water with a thin slice of ginger. When I settled into the couch, back against a pillow, I realized I no longer felt the need to run. I still didn't know what the deposition would bring, but I was starting to feel like I was in the right place. That morning, I wore a light brown sweater with a dark cardigan over it, not because it was cold. December in Raleigh was fairly mild, but because I needed something around me that felt safe. Helen picked me up. She said nothing as I got into the car, just turned on soft classical music, no lyrics, just strings and stillness. The deposition took place in a private conference room, not a courtroom. Only the attorneys, the judge, involved parties, and a stenographer were present. Daniel had arrived early. He sat upright, hands folded on the table, no handshake, no eye contact. As I took my seat, my heart wasn't racing. I didn't feel anger or fear, just the sensation of standing at the end of a very long road. Rowan came in last. He wore a hoodie, nothing formal, but his face had clearly changed. The evasiveness, the forced smile, none of that was there today. The judge began by confirming our voluntary participation and sworn commitment. Then it was my turn to speak. I didn't look at Daniel. I looked at the judge. "I'm not here to fight over assets," I said, my voice steady. "I'm here because I want answers. Because I've stayed silent too long, and what's been buried too deep deserves the light." Archer presented the file, reading a section from my mother's journal, then handed over the 2012 bank statement, the year Daniel withdrew funds from the scholarship account. Daniel stayed still, hands still folded, but I saw his index finger curl slightly into his palm. When it was his turn, Daniel cleared his throat and spoke briefly. "I don't deny what's in the file, but I don't believe I'm the only one who should bear the responsibility." The room went quiet. Then the judge asked, "Will you clarify?" Daniel glanced at Rowan, then looked down at the table. "I think I lost my way after Evelyn passed. I convinced myself the money was to stabilize everything, for the future. But what I failed to see was how clearly I had wronged Sophia." Rowan bowed his head. Helen looked at me. Archer flipped a few pages as if searching for something else to present, but he didn't need to add anything. The judge requested a brief recess before making a recommendation. We all stepped out and waited in the third-floor lobby, where the large windows overlooked the courthouse lawn. Rowan came and sat next to me. He said nothing for a minute, then handed me an envelope. "I've transferred back all the investment fund shares Dad held in his name," he said, "not to make up for anything, but because I believe you deserve to rebuild something your way." I opened it, legal confirmation papers, and a small handwritten note. "No one can take your place again." I folded it, slipped it into my bag, and looked at him. "It's not about holding power. I just want to live without having to prove my worth to someone who once called me family." We sat in silence a while longer until Helen emerged from the hallway and gave a small nod. The judge approved. Daniel must repay the scholarship funds Sophia lost, adjusted to current value plus interest. Also, his request to maintain financial influence over his children was denied. I nodded. No triumph, just a long exhale. A week later, I returned to Margaret's bookstore. She was watering winter plants on the porch. "I heard," she said as I walked in. "No one should have to use courtrooms to earn fairness. But if you must, use it like a shovel to dig your way out." I smiled, a real one. Helen had news too. She'd started part-time consulting for families in conflict. Not therapy, she said, just someone who's been in the storm before. Sometimes that's enough. As for me, I started focusing on smaller things, growing mint behind the porch, rewriting a personal finance notebook for young adults, and calling Rowan regularly just to ask what he had for dinner. And there may never be a perfect family, but I've stopped chasing that idea. All I need now is to know I don't have to give up more of myself just to be seen. I don't know where you're listening from, in your car, before bed, or on a day when you needed a story to remind you to stand tall. Let me know where you're listening from, and if you'd like to hear more honest journeys like this, don't forget to follow the channel because the next story might be exactly what you've been waiting for. Sophia's story is a powerful reminder that justice doesn't always come from the people we love. It comes from choosing to stand up for ourselves. Even when the wound is rooted in family, the very place we're taught should feel safest. Sophia chose truth over silence, boundaries over tolerance. In the real world, so many carry the weight of being dismissed or manipulated, but like Sophia, they can begin again with one quiet choice: to never let anyone define their worth again.